All right, hello everybody. Today, or rather this week, I read or reread A Darkness at Sethanon, which is the fourth book in the Rift War saga by Raymond Feist. We've already talked about Magician Apprentice, Magician Master, and most recently Silverthorn. This is the fourth and final book in the Rift War saga, and honestly, it is probably my favorite book by Feist, which is a bit of a, which is a double, which is like a double-edged blade in the sense that if I want to recommend this book to people, I have to also tell them, well, you should read these other three books that aren't quite as good first. But you really should read these books, in saga order, right? You can pick any saga you want, as I've mentioned before, and start at the beginning of the saga, but you really shouldn't jump in mid-saga. It just doesn't work so well. But anyway, this one has excellent dialogue, excellent world building, excellent character development, a very fun and interesting plot where there's kind of two plot lines that split off into a third one. There's some very well-deserved epicness, as opposed to, let's have explodey magic in the very first scene of the book. We've now had 3 books of build-up to show that the problems are getting bigger and bigger and bigger that they're dealing with, and, not only is the big magic justified at this point, right? We've got characters who've had training arcs of years that involve this, and we also have some cool, magical powers from the bad guy's side too, right? But in this book in particular, I think Feist does a really good job of handling big magic. One of the complaints I had about Silverthorn is that his big magic in that book was kind of, and that was the first time I'd read that book, but I've seen this in his later books as well, is that some of the big magic is just kind of a light show. And in this book, Feist is clever in 2 ways about dealing with big magic. Number one, by being creative with how that big magic expresses itself. Flaming Pegasi, or some examples of things where it's not just a light show, right? There's this happening, there's this happening. And then in addition, there's actually this funny little point where Pug has had to fight through umpteen traps already with his magic, and there's this point where he's just like, I'm tired of this, let's just deal with this with the and get it over with, kind of thing. And then he conjures up this big magic storm, and it's like, yeah, okay, that I like, right? He's like, yeah, whatever, let's just, okay, fine, we've already done a bunch of things with really cool ideas, here's a light show, and let's just get it over with, right? I'm tired of this. So all in all, it's a really good book. It's got a lot of well-deserved high-stakes stuff. There's this battle for a city, called Armengar, where Feist is handling both siege warfare and small unit combat very, very well. There's surprises and realism in the way things are handled, and it's very just very skillfully done. We even have sometimes Feist's single combat can get a little bit repetitive. There's this one move that Jimmy the Hand does 4 times throughout his appearances in the multiple books, where he basically thrusts with his rapier and then ducks down and just barely touches the floor with his other hand. And you see that several times over the course of a few books, to the point where it's like, I get it. That's his signature move, whatever. But in this book in particular, there's some single combat that goes on that's actually really well handled. We have some single combat from Tomas. We have some single combat from Arutha and friends. All kinds of really good, Jimmy and Locklear and all that good stuff. And even in this book, even the single combat is really, really well handled and has a lot of variety and unpredictability, nuance, that kind of stuff. There are some very cool, interesting questions of honor near the end, and what a person's conception of honor is and how it relates to their interactions with other people. It's all very, very well done, and there's a lot of really cool stuff going on in this book, including some more of those character moments that I really enjoy, where someone meets someone who they haven't seen in a long time, and some kind of thing, some kind of interaction goes on where there's something under the surface there. So, at this point, we're going to move on to a little bit of minor plot summary, just to give a little bit more detail. So if you don't want any spoilers at all, cut here. and go read the book and then see if your opinion coincides with mine. But basically, this book starts about a year after the end of Silverthorn. Now, at the end of Silverthorn, Pug was going to go train in magic with the elves over on Kelowon, the Eldar, I believe. In this book, our two main plot lines are, number one, Pug and Tomas know that something bad is happening, and so Pug and Tomas go off on this magical journey to go do a thing, which I won't spoil any more of. But, if you've read the other books, you'll probably have a rough idea of what they're trying to do. In this part of the book where we have Pug and Tomas going on, we have some really good single combat, some really clever use of magic. We have some very cool mythological world building where you get to see representations of what the gods of Midkemia are like and how they interact with people. And, it's left very open to did we actually experience that, or was it some kind of hallucination? But whatever, we got information that we needed, let's move on kind of thing. It's all very well done, and it adds a lot of layers to the world of Midkemia, in the sense that now we have some ideas of the greater but less but more disinterested, right, forces that are behind this world. And I think some of that is really, really interesting and really well done. There's some cool interactions with characters there that I won't spoil, but it is stuff that I really enjoy and remember fondly. Now, the other side of the plot is that with Pug and Tomas gone, conveniently, this is a pretty basic, author trick, right? You have two of these very powerful characters who could solve this problem, but because of circumstances, they have to go somewhere else, which leaves a weaker group of characters to deal with this problem, and the problem is actually kind of scaled to them. Now, we know from the previous book that there's this whole thing going on with Mermandamus, right? He's the dark elf leader that has reappeared suddenly, and he's gathering armies. In the last book, the death of Murad and the thwarting of Mermandamus' forces held him back for another year, but that year is now passed. Now, Mermandamus is trying to set up his armies so that they can march on the kingdom, and I won't spoil why they're trying to eventually march on the kingdom, because that's a very important part of the book. But what basically happens is that a group, including, Arutha, Martin, Laurie, Roald, Baru, Jimmy, and Locklear, all start to plan about going north to see if they can deal with Mermandamus, or at least figure out what he's doing, and then figure out an appropriate counter. Then there are some actions that happen that are kind of interesting and fun, and I won't spoil them, but part of this group now ends up going north. Now, they go north to outside the limits of the kingdom. They reach, these steppes and plains and all that stuff that's out of their own jurisdiction, so to speak. They find the city called Armengar. Some characters that we haven't actually seen yet appear now. And we've had discussions about some of these characters, but we've never actually seen them in action. And now we get to see them in action. And that's another really cool thing about this book, because you have, Group A, Martin, etc., and you have Group B of new, characters who are kind of opposed to them, but not really. You get kind of this very interesting kind of half conflict that's going on that kind of raises the tension a little bit and makes things very interesting, because, the two groups have to learn to work together, or else they'll both face destruction, basically. Long story short, all of that stuff with this new group of characters who we've heard of before but never seen in action is extremely interesting. All the characters that end up heading north are super interesting, and stuff happens to almost all of them that kind of advances their characters. Locklear gets some very heavy advancement or development in this story, and Jimmy is along for the ride, but he learns this and that as well. Then the Martin etc. plotline actually splits off into another subplot where there's now there's a ticking clock. There's a siege going on, and the idea is that they have to get help to Armengar before Armengar falls. This is I think, a pretty well-handled ticking clock. I'm not a big fan of overusing ticking clocks, right? It's like, sure, we have 10 minutes until the space station explodes, whatever. It's exactly 16 seconds from now. I always find that can be a little bit overused and a little bit haphazardly used. But in this case, I think it's led up to in a very careful way, where they're not just like, okay, you guys got to go. We don't, and time is a wasting. It's more like, okay, the army is marching on us. Before they all reach and surround Armengar, we have some time to figure out whether we should send people out or not, right? We have some time to figure out, what's the best plan if we could actually send people back. We have some information from Armengarians about previous attempts to send people back, right? And then the ticking clock itself is not so tick tick tick. It's like, it's indeterminate a little bit, because they're not sure how long Armengar can hold, right? It might be that Armengar falls in a day, or it might be that it falls in 2 weeks, or it might be that it falls in 4 weeks, or something like that. There's some cool strategy that they use to kind of explain what they think the limits of their timing are, right? It's like, oh, well, the winter starts early in this part of the kingdom, and so they're going to need to be through the passes by this date. And so that gives them approximately this amount of time to actually take down Armengar. And if they can't do that, they're probably not going to make it any further than that. So, there's actually a side possibility. Can we just hold out long enough that they can't push through? Well, maybe they can, right? But what ends up happening is a nice little third subplot that is really, really engaging, and I think handled very, very well. Yeah, I don't want to spend too much more time on stuff that involves minor spoilers. But what I'll say is that practically everything in this book is feels like it was planned for, and really is really well handled, and it feels realistic, it feels nuanced, it feels realistic. It just feels right. And that's including the Pug Tomas quest, which is highly magical, but also feels pretty realistic when you actually kind of look at the way that things go, and how much effort there's been made already to get these characters, to demonstrate how much power they actually have. So I think I'll stop there. It's a fantastic book, and it's almost a pity that it's the last in a series of 4, because you really probably should read the previous 3 books before you read this one. Now, to be fair, I did not read Silverthorn before I read this one, right? I read Magician Apprentice and Magician Master, and then I got a copy of A Darkness at Sethanon. And it's very... In the review of Silverthorn, I said, maybe Silverthorn is a little bit rough, and maybe that's why it wasn't in the bookstores when I was looking for it. But Darkness at Sethanon I did get from a bookstore, and so, it was one of those things where it's like, yeah, this belongs on shelves. This should be in places. People should read this. And it's a really good conclusion to the Rift War saga. It leads into... From here, you could go into one of 2 different sagas, because there's one that happens chronologically next, and that's going to be the Rift War Legacy. It's 3 books. Krondor the Betrayal... Krondor the Assassins, and Tear of the Gods, I believe, are the 3 titles in that saga, that legacy. And those are mostly about Jimmy the Hand in his kind of mid-years and his work for Arutha. And it's a fun series, but it is also a little bit more pen and paper tabletop game kind of feel to it. There's a lot more, I cast magic missile kind of feeling to the magic, and there's a lot more we got a quest from a character and now we have to get 15 wolf pelts kind of thing. Which isn't to say that those books are bad, but they are a little bit tropey at times. And they do suffer for that in some way. Now, the next saga that Feist wrote was actually a 2-book saga called Krondor's Sons, and that includes Prince of the Blood, or Princes of the Blood? Prince of the Blood, and The King's Buccaneer. And those are also both very, very good books. Books that do a good job of handling they're actually very focused on kind of like political intrigue and stuff like that, and so they're both very good reads, and I would recommend those as well. I'll probably move on to Rift 4 Legacy, do these in world chronological order rather than written chronological order, right? But that's kind of my plan. I'll get to some of those sooner or later, so maybe we'll have Krondor the Betrayal in a few weeks. But anyway, this book is fantastic. It is one of my, if not my favorite, it is one of my favorite Feist books. It is one that I can go back to and look at over and over again because there's just so much good stuff in there, handled so well. We get some interactions with Liam, we get interactions with Martin and Laurie and Roald the fighter and Baru the Highlander and Jimmy and Locklear. We get some development for both of them. We get to see a really well-handled siege. We get magic that's big. We get magic that's small. And the magic that's big is handled cleverly and interestingly. And things are done with it that are like, oh, that's, it could have just been a golden shield, but in fact it's this, and that's actually kind of cool. We get some very good mythological world building for Midkemia, and yeah, it's just a really good read. It's a long book too, but worth it. So yeah, I will call it there for today. We will be doing the next part of Dead Man's Tale later this week. And until then, I would say have a good week, and I'll see you next time.